Being limitless is knowing your success and your growth are built on a radical belief in yourself. Limitless is honoring your purpose, your health, and impact above all else. Limitless is never playing small because the more alive you feel in your life, the more growth and success you attract. Hi, my name is Jamie Ratermann, and I am a holistic business coach, meaning I am just as invested in growing your health as I am in growing your wealth. With 11 plus years in brand and social media marketing, I help rebellious entrepreneurs master marketing, embody leadership, and say fuck it to the hustle. This show is here to encourage you to become more radically aware of your self-imposed limits, to break free of your shoulds, and to expand your brand into a movement led by you. Hello, lovelies. Welcome to episode 37 of the Limitless Podcast. Today is a true joy of a conversation. I'm over here getting ready. We got our water, we got our tea. Today's tea is telling me that may all beings be happy. So we're going to talk about happiness as it is around boundaries today. Today we're talking to Allison KT. She is extra special to me for the fact that when I decided to make my switch into coaching, she was one of the first people to sign up for the content planning sprints. So I have pretty much seen her, if not every Wednesday, at least 2 Wednesdays out of every month for the last 2 years. So not only has she been a big support to me, of course, but I have watched her business evolve, and she is freaking amazing. So one thing to note about Allison is that she is everyone's biggest cheerleader, but also loves to remind us when we're being people pleasers. How many times have we talked about that on this podcast? So she is a boundaries coach for people pleasers. She does that by combining psychology and conflict transformation. She's been a guest coach in many of my programs, not only because she can be helpful in how to set boundaries, but really like talking about when it happens, how to handle it. So I'm so excited to have her on the podcast today. Allison, thank you so much for joining me.
Yay! I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, just to echo, I remember joining my very first content sprint and just looking at where my business is since then, where your business is since then. It's just been really awesome to sort of watch. And now knowing that 300 sprinters have come through or something like that, it's been incredible. So I'm super excited that we're making the time to have this conversation today.
I'm so excited to have you. So tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, I could talk about it for ages, but I know that you've got some of that you've worked through a lot of things yourself. I know that recently in the sprint, you were talking about how you're really leaning into the healer side of your business too. So go ahead and tell us just a little bit about what it was to start your own business and kind of your background.
Yeah, definitely. So I am a very empathic and highly sensitive person. I've always felt emotions in a really big way, and also made myself responsible for other people's emotions, always worrying are my friends having a good time? Do they like me? Am I being funny? Am I taking up too much space? I had so much of that going on in my head. Growing up very conflict avoidant, just really in that good girl, teacher's pet, good student kind of realm. And I knew that, the corporate world wasn't for me. I definitely was burnt out in that realm. And that was what led me to starting my own business, deciding, I want to help other people be more confident, all of that kind of stuff. But I really found when I tried to start my own business that I butted up against that people pleasing a lot, because when you're going into business for yourself, you need to have your own back in a big way. You need to be very clear on what you're doing, be committed to it, and able to have those boundaries with people when they're not willing to jump into this yes, you got this kind of mindset with you. And so I had to learn a lot about stepping away from my own people-pleasing tendencies, learning to see myself as a very powerful individual, and inviting people into that. And so I added this piece of energy medicine to my work. I now use tools like Reiki to help people, not only yes, I've got the psychology background, the conflict transformation background, the kind of boundaries ability to help how to communicate what you want to communicate, but also I love helping people feel safe in themselves to be you know what, I got this. I know how to defend myself in this conversation. I know how to stand up for myself. And so, yeah, I mean, this business really came out of my own experiences of struggling with people pleasing and not setting boundaries. And the more I talk about boundaries, the more people are like, holy cow, this is huge in my life. And so I feel really grateful to kind of be at this position of having this unique skill set to really support people with this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's so important. I think when we talk about boundaries, someone's like, oh yeah, it's just boundaries. I'm like, but boundaries play a role in everything, like everything. And what I loved, something that you were sharing, is that I think it's very natural for women. I mean, I think men too, but natural for women to feel like it's a badge of honor to show that we care for others, sometimes more than ourselves. And I've even like thought about like motherhood for my own self and how I don't want to be a martyr. I want to like show how great it is to take care of myself. But I think this comes up a lot with even clients when like they're trying to, think about their workload and how they take care of their clients versus like how they have outreach. And then usually the ones that have a lot of difficulty setting a boundary, it's like, I'm like, what kind of role did you play in your friend group? And then she's like, oh, the mom, the one that takes care of everybody. And it's this like idea that like you are worthy of boundaries. You're worthy of like saying no and all those pieces. And when it comes down to it, and I think it sounds sexy to be your own boss, but being your own boss means going inside and internal about your patterns and knowing that if you feel burnout, the only person responsible for that is you. And understanding that like it's not just like stop it, like it's like stop it, like be better, don't hustle. It's like why am I hustling? How can I release this? How can I create this emotional change? And so even though like boundaries may sound like a word everyone hears all the time, this shit's hard. It's not simple.
Yeah.
It's not simple at all. But what would you say, like, I remember you talking about like helping people pleasers, all of these things in the past, but like what made you just like really focus in on like, let's talk about boundaries and build like healing, psychology, the conflict transformation? Like what made you decide like that's going to be my thing and to focus on completely?
Yeah. So it came out because I started noticing that this doesn't just limit itself to one place. Like if you're people pleasing, at work, you're probably also people pleasing at home. If you're people pleasing with your boss, you're probably also people pleasing with your mom. Like it probably shows up in multiple places. And I had actually heard, and this goes really well with what you were just saying about, putting everybody first. I heard this story of I think I read it online, of some people that were like this woman who's at a funeral for this woman who had passed away. And there were all of these beautiful eulogies. And it was like, oh, she was the best mom. She was always there for me. She always did everything, to help out. And then it was like the church people were like, oh yeah, she always was helping out and was always there. And the takeaway from the story is that this woman walked away and was like, I know nothing about the woman who died. I know nothing about her passions. All I know is who she was in relation to these other people. All I know is that she like martyred herself to keep everyone happy. All I know is that she like spent her whole lifetime being who she needed to be to others. And I was just like, man, how often does that happen? And I see it too with people. I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs who come to me and they have an idea, but then they just get in their own way about it. And they're like, oh, but who would listen to me? Oh, but what could I ever do? Like, why would this ever work for me? And like the imposter syndrome is so big. And it just bums me out because I'm like, no, the world needs people who are doing it differently. The world needs people who are like standing in their own power. And so the more that I saw people who were just like, oh, it's not for me, I'm not that kind of person, I was just like, no, you can be that kind of person. And it really starts with that just like mindset of being willing to put yourself out there, to stand up for yourself. I like to say that like most succinctly, boundaries are one, teaching other people how to treat you. So like saying, this is, I'm available for this is what I'm available for. But then there's also the second piece of teaching yourself how you deserve to be treated, and like really tuning into like, I know that I don't deserve to be, screamed at or ripped apart for this viewpoint, XYZ. And so that's kind of how I break it down. And once I started seeing boundaries in that way of like, yes, it's the outward teaching people how to engage with you, but it's also like knowing internally what you deserve. So now I'm just all about like helping people step into that. Cause like I said, the world needs healers and people who are just, trying to change it. So
totally. Yeah. And I think there's what I take away from that. And I think there's this, like the common metaphor of like, fill your own cup first, and then everyone gets what you spill over. And and like this, like pouring from an empty cup type of idea. And I think that metaphor works really well, but it's also going like, you're not allowing your magic, your purpose, your passion to be what drives you. You're being driven by what others get from you. And and that can just be such a depleting feeling. So I think, I love the eulogy idea. I think I've heard that before, but you're reminding me of it. And it's just this idea of like, what would you want your eulogy to be?
Yeah.
What would you like it to be? And I know for me, maybe we could just play with this, is that I know for me, I want to be able to say like, she lived her life loudly and boldly, and like she followed through, and she was an example for others. Like, I think that's what I'd want. And I know what comes with that. Yeah, no, this is fun. What would you say you would love like your eulogy to include?
I love that. Yeah, I do think like, yeah, I'm totally here for the like, supporting other people, lifting them up in their dreams. But I love that too. Like, I want people to say and remember, like, she was brave. She was fearless. She dyed her hair hot pink. She wore full sequin dresses.
Great. I love that.
She lived her life exactly how she wanted. She went after it. She, followed her heart and didn't play small and like stay in this safe little box. Yeah. I want people to acknowledge that I busted out of the box.
Hell yeah, you did. And I love that. I think it's hard to realize this, but sometimes the best way for anyone to learn from you is just like you leading by example. And I think that sometimes people think, oh, I'll give to people and they'll learn that way. But like leading by example is such a big deal. So one thing that I really kind of hold with our relationship specifically is that when I met you was quite soon after I lost my dad, and you were vulnerable and very willing to share with me that you had lost yours as well. And I believe I know this, but I believe there's a reason why you are Poppy Lead, and we can maybe dive into that a little bit. But as we're talking about these things, I just realized, legacy is such a part of the things that I hold dear around losing my dad. Like, what was his legacy for me, and like, what can I take from that and decide that like I want a bigger bit, like this bold legacy myself. So how do you feel like how your dad's relationship has played a role in you as an entrepreneur in your business?
Yeah. Ooh, love that question, and like love the space to just talk about this and share. Cause my dad, we had a very close relationship when I was growing up. Our birthdays were 2 days apart. Like he was also very empathic, and I think very highly sensitive. And just, he really understood like the concept of just getting peopled out sometimes, and the concept of like, I just need to go sit alone in my room, and it doesn't mean I'm mad at you. It just means I need some alone time. Like, he really understood and honored that in me. But he also just always, amped up my ability to do what I wanted. He always reminded me how strong I was, how smart I was. And that voice really carried me through in some of those early entrepreneurial days of being like, can I do this? Will people listen to me? It was like I had that voice right there of like, you're so smart, like you're everyone's favorite person to be around, and just like all of this uplifting energy from him. And I think too, I saw how people pleasing and like worrying about others held him back. He was an entrepreneur as well. He had a small cleaning business. And I always saw how difficult it was for him to raise his prices or to, potentially rock the boat in any way. Like he always just kind of had this like, oh, well, that's just how it is kind of mentality. And looking back now, I'm just like, no, like there's so much possibility. And so I kind of see, and like you were saying too, the legacy piece of like, like he touched my life and impacted me in such a big way. And I'm just like, man, if he had been confident in himself, if he had like seen himself as, worthy and smart and all of these beautiful messages he had given to me, like what could have been different for him? And so I always think of that now too. I'm just like, I feel his love and the way that he loved me, and like I want to spread that to others. And yeah, the connection with my business is when I was growing up, I thought it was just adorable to call him Poppy Seed, not Pops or Papa or anything like that, but he was Poppy Seed. And like I said, we were very close, and I found coaching right around the time that he was passing away from cancer in 2016. And I found the coaching program I wanted to do, and then learned like, oh my gosh, it's way too much money. I can't do the certification right now. I'll have to wait. And like that same day, I think my mom called and was like, holy cow, your dad apparently had this like life insurance policy, and I'm sending you a check for like $10,000.
Oh, wow.
Which was like exactly what I needed to pay for this coaching program. And so it was just this beautiful, like, he was sort of there. His like last little gift to me was this like, hey, you know what? Go do this. Like,
I love that.
Here's support for you to go do this. So
I
like connected my business to him, and I love leadership and all of that. So I bring it to Poppy Lead now as a little nod to Poppy Seed, who's with me in this journey.
Yeah, I love that. You're saying your how you got your coaching certification, right? That was related to it. Yeah, I think if there's any kind of love I think we can show for our loved ones who've passed, is being able to look at what we wished they had in their life and live that for ourselves now. And I think that's a big deal around this, is that I like everything you were sharing about your dad. Like he wanted everything for me. He was like it was like a badge of honor of like, look at what he was able to provide. And it's like, oh yeah, like, but what I take away is that I like, what do I want for myself, and how does that turn into like how I lead others, which is what I love so much. So like, thank you, dads. Thank you,
Yay. Yay.
So let's dive into the topic at hand specifically. Let's kind of go ahead and just talk about boundaries as a whole, especially as the holidays are coming up. I know that families, I've had more than one conversation, clients and friends alone, talking about like handling boundaries with families around the holidays and what that can be. But I think the best way to just kind of jump into this is, why do you think it's in general just so hard to set boundaries?
Yeah, definitely. I have a very scientific answer for this, because I think there is like legit science behind why it is so hard. We were taught to be nice. We were taught to put people first. We were taught, sometimes it's selfish to speak up for yourself. We were given kind of these messages, fit the box, that taught us to people please. And if you're like me, it taught you to fear conflict or to fear discomfort. And so there's this term, emotophobia, that is the fear of negative emotions. And so that's where I kind of see the big struggle with this, because it's like, oh, I could set a boundary, but they might think, they might respond poorly to that. They might yell at me. They might ask me why. They might put me on the spot. And so we're just like, I don't want anything bad to happen. I don't want anything uncomfortable to happen. So I'm just going to like not set the boundary. And then I'm just going to people please, let it go. And like, that's kind of the way, that's actually like the distinction I draw between like being a nice person and people pleasing. Because some people might say like, oh yeah, I'm just, a kind person. I always let my friend pick the restaurant. That's fine. And it's like, okay, check in with your brain. Like, are you letting your friend pick the restaurant because they enjoy it? You want to just let them do it? Or is it like this inside piece of you that's like, oh, because I know I'll pick the wrong one and like she'll be mad, or like, what if I ruin the night? And what if there's nothing she can eat there? And, you know, if you get in your head with these fears of like, what if, that's kind of what keeps us from setting the boundaries. And so like boundaries particular feel really difficult because a lot of times we need a boundary in a situation where there has not previously been a boundary. So there's this extra added piece of like, okay, I have to have a conversation now that will be uncomfortable, but is necessary. And like, sometimes that like, oh, but it's going to be uncomfortable, like really keeps us from doing it. And like, you know, we are breaking patterns, like breaking ways that we have done things. And so it definitely can be really frightening for a lot of people. And so that's, I kind of think why boundaries feel really hard for people, is because there's just this fear of like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if they get mad at me? What if it ruins the friendship? What if they think I don't want to, you know, be with them anymore? All of these kinds of things. And that just keeps us in that like, well, I guess I just won't say anything then.
Yeah.
Place.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the fear of conflict and how like people think any kind of conflict is unhealthy. I think there's a side of that. I think that there's a likability factor too. I think when boundaries come up a lot, they're like, but they won't like me, or like, I want the more, the nicer I can be, the more that they're going to like me. And I think there's also a control factor. Like you can't control how other people react. So this is like where it comes in. I think the most recent like boundary conversation specific was like someone just like setting the terms of the night of what they want to do. And they were like, what if the restaurant's not good enough? What if they don't have good appetizers? What will my friend think of me? And it's like, it's a co-created experience. What's going on? So that, but it was just this like, they wanted it to be liked and respected for their because they always make the best choices. And, you know, like there's a perfectionism measure, I guess, in that example. But I think the fear of conflict is such a big piece there. I think the fear of conflict and really prioritizing what they think likability is over what would actually nourish them. And so I love this. I think that makes total sense, but it's like the catastrophizing. It's about turning off your brain. It's all of these things. So like, how do you help somebody, you know, approach conflict?
Yeah. Ooh, love it. Yeah. And this is so fun because like I said, I was deeply conflict avoidant growing up, like very much was like, no, thank you. Dust it under the rug. We just are very peaceful. But for some reason I decided to study conflict transformation of all things in undergrad. And it really did teach me how necessary conflict is. But like there is a distinction between conflict and combat. Like we don't have to go into combat and like fight or all of that. But I think conflict, like it is such a necessary, healthy thing to stand up for yourself. And I think I stepped away from what your initial question was. Could you throw?
How do you help someone approach conflict?
Yeah. So I think approaching the conflict, like one, realize that this is actually a great piece of information for you. Because if somebody says something and it upsets you and there's going to be conflict there, like, okay, you're aware, like, oh, maybe they butted up against a core value of yours. Maybe you're not feeling seen or heard in the situation. And so you need to speak up. Maybe you see somebody, being attacked on the street and you want to like step in. Like all of that starts with this like underlying sense of worthiness and this underlying sense of like, okay, I see something is not right. I'm going to say something about it. I'm going to step up. And if you have that like confidence and inherent, just like, okay, I deserve to do this. I deserve to speak my truth. I deserve to share what needs to be shared. Then like it's much easier to step into that place. And like going into it with that power of like, okay, I'm conflict situation, always trying to come in as your higher self rather than like your ego self. is also a place I would start with. Like a great example of this, I had a family member who sent me a text message one time that was like pretty passive aggressive. And I sort of took a beat before responding to the situation, because I was like, okay, one, I know I don't deserve to be spoken to this way. Two, this like makes me want to pull away even further and is not beneficial to supporting a relationship. And so I chose to respond to that situation from like, okay, I'm going to be in my higher self. I'm going to like step back and observe. Because if my ego self went in, I'd be like, well, that's right. Like I would just fight and it would be combative. And like, there's not really a great, I don't see a lot of great outcomes coming from me just going in that kind of headspace. But coming into it from my higher self, I was like, okay, I see that something is amiss in the situation. I'm noticing something's off. And I just like spoke very calmly in that situation and was like, hey, I noticed that I seem to have upset you somehow. I feel like I don't understand what happened. Like, could we talk about this? And it was a much better outcome in the conversation, because I kind of went into it with like, okay, I'm aware that I don't deserve to be treated this way, or like, I'm aware that something wrong is happening. I feel confident and worthy of stepping in, and then I'm going to do it from this higher self place that can actually bring about positive change in the situation, rather than this like, nitpicky, ego-based kind of reaction.
Totally. If we're going to go into conflict, how can we do it in a slow way? We don't have to like jump to conclusions, like get rid of as much pettiness as we can. I feel like ego always comes with like fear and like you're less than, but being able to say like, whatever happens, I'm going to at least take a beat, and like even if it's a deep breath, and be able to say like, I don't agree with that, and we're allowed to disagree. And like I think that the hardest conversations, the conflict conversations, I end up being like really like, just we're gonna take our time. We're not we're gonna like, if something feels awkward, we're gonna wait till they finish. Like there's like just knowing that that's the difference between that and like in the past where I would just like get ready to like yell and get into that.
For sure. Yeah. And I always like to remind people too that like, if you feel yourself in that place, like there's nothing wrong with having that like immediate reaction of like, what? Like, oh my gosh. And like, I totally like, I go to other people to like talk through that, or I journal about it. It's not helpful necessarily to like dump those offenses like on the person who is committing those offenses, because like that's probably not going to help. But I'm 100% proponent of like texting your girl gang and being like, can you believe this? And just like having the processing there, all about it. And then just noticing like, if you feel yourself starting to get that way in the conversation of like, ooh, I'm about to start being petty and like, I'm getting really angry here. That's where you can always take that beat and like say, could we come back to this conversation? Like, I don't feel like I'm in the right headspace to like come up with a creative solution to this. Could we talk about it tomorrow? And like, excuse yourself. You don't have to keep going down the like rabbit hole and like be like, no, we need to come to an answer now. Because like, I don't know if either of you were like in the headspace to like come up with a loving solution at that point. So always feel free to excuse yourself if you need to.
Another boundary within when you're setting a boundary, going like, if it's going, and if it's not going anywhere, you don't have to just sit in that. You don't have to sit until it's finished, which I think can be hard sometimes, because like it's like setting that. I even had a previous episode, I called it the entering the villain era, for a lot of our people pleasers, just like putting on a bit of an alter ego of like, I'm going to get that respect, even if it's going to cause people to see me as the villain. They'll get on board or they won't, because I deserve these things. So I think there's such a side of that. But let's talk about different types of boundaries, because I know what I think they are, because I feel like I run into them a couple of times. But how many types of boundaries do you think there are? Like kind of like how can people start to think about these?
For sure. I'm a big fan of mental models and like just like ways to kind of conceptualize things. And so I honestly just break it down to two types. I break it down to outer boundaries, which are like boundaries with people who are outside of you, your friends, your family, your clients, your colleagues, community groups, all of those kinds of people. And you might have different boundaries, you know, within that of like time boundaries or schedule boundaries, you know, conversation boundaries, what you're available for. But I see that kind of as like, okay, you've got your outer realms. And then I see your inner boundaries as a second set of boundaries. And so these are boundaries with like your own inner critic. Like, what will you allow yourself to say to yourself? How, like, what do you let your negative or your self-talk sound like? Boundaries with your inner child and like your desire to protect your inner child, boundaries with your own energetic needs. So I really kind of see it as just like breaking into those two of like, okay, I've got my outer boundaries, and that's where I see it's like teaching other people how to treat me. And then I have my inner boundaries of like teaching myself how I deserve to be treated. And so I break it into those two distinctions, but kind of like within the outer boundaries piece, I do really talk about like relationship boundaries. I think of this a lot in terms of like myself as a coach who is friends like with some of my clients, or like having like I'm friends with some of my coaches. And so like relationship boundaries, I think of there as like, who are we to each other in that moment, and like honoring the boundaries of like, okay, we're not going to use like a paid coaching conversation to like catch up on what's going on in each other's lives. Right. And like, we're also not going to use like going out for dinner as like a coaching session. Right. And so like having those kinds of boundaries, and then like time boundaries are a big one too, of like who, you know, for your child, you might be available 24/7, 365. But for your clients, you might be available, you know, 10 to 4 Monday through Thursday. Like,
try to be, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. And so knowing, you know, those kinds of like setting those kind of boundaries, but I do really break it down into like inner and outer at the most like basic level. And then from there, like there's a couple others that you kind of feel out in terms of the relationship and like when you're available and what you're available for and that kind of stuff.
Totally. So yeah, you and I are very similar. I usually say there's 3, but it's within your subtopics of what you're saying, like relationship boundaries, which can be everything from like what you allow people to know about you to like how available you are to how much time you're allowed to give to them. But then there's like the time and energy boundaries. And sometimes that can be for yourself, because I know there are people that will realize if they don't set the boundary, they will give their time away. And like they like have some kind of preset to that, but also like the energy piece is such a thing. Like if you in general walk into a room and the people in that room just suck your energy, that's a boundary you might need to set. And I love that. But the interpersonal ones are always the hardest. And that was like, when I look at it, those are the 3 places that I really see it. So let's talk about relationship boundaries, because I think these are going to be the biggest ones. So we're coming up on the holidays, and I know that there's always a running meme for entrepreneurs when they walk into Thanksgiving dinner with their extended family and they get asked this question: how is your little business doing? So how would you like, you know, for somebody who let's say they're a brand new entrepreneur, they're a new-ish entrepreneur, and they don't know really how to handle that kind of setting, how would you help them set a relationship boundary around that topic with let's say their uncle who's like looking their nose down at them?
Yeah, totally. So in this situation, like I always think it's important to, you know, stand in that power within you, because if you feel uncertainty or like shakiness within yourself, sometimes people who are like trying to pick apart your boundary will like latch onto that and be like, well, it doesn't even sound like you really believe in it. And it's like, wait.
Oh my gosh, yes, the power of clarity is a big deal for in many ways, but yes.
Yeah. So if you're going in with that confidence of like, no, this is what I'm doing, like I'm very committed to this, you know, you can just acknowledge, like, if it feels important to acknowledge, like, yeah, it's not really a little business anymore. This is my full-time job. It's what I'm committed to. I'm working with clients. I'm creating this great future for myself, and I'm really having a blast. Thanks for asking. And just kind of, you know, turning around, oh, I'm so glad you're interested. Let me tell you all about the like successes I'm achieving. And like, because there could be that desire to be like, it's not little, I made it, 6 figures last year, and like to jump in and like rationalize and explain. But just kind of, being in that power of like, I'm not going to try to convince you, Uncle Joe, about why this is a beneficial thing. Especially if you feel like, oh my gosh, he's just trying to, catch me saying something and like twist my words around. So, I kind of like in those situations, because I think sometimes there's that piece too of like, maybe he's just asking because he wants to feel connected to you, but doesn't know how to ask the questions. And like, so just honoring and acknowledging like, hey, I think it's going great. Like, this is my business. How's your job, uncle person? And like
uncle person.
Uncle person.
I think but in particular, like what you're saying is I usually like try to, let clients know, like, check in if you're in any way coming into that conversation with proving energy. If you're trying to prove the ability that your business is great, like it's going to be felt instead of like, usually if I'm walking into like a bigger family scenario, but like, what would these people be most interested in? And I'll just be clear before I walk in the door. Just knowing what to expect can be a part of that. But also, there are certain relatives that I know not to really give too much to. And there are certain ones that I know are particularly interested. And and that's always what's fun, is that like allow someone to surprise you sometimes. But it's funny, like even in particular with this podcast, I had an uncle of mine who was like, I listen to your podcast, and I would have never realized it. And I'm like, and my initial reaction was like, what do you think? Like, what do you think? He's like, it's really cool. And it was like being able to just know that like, how confident you feel about the topic can be helpful. But to not walk into it always with this, like, I got to prove myself. They must think there's something wrong with this or whatever it might be. Cause there's definitely a factor in there about that for sure.
Totally.
Yeah. So aside from business, cause I think it's important, what about relationships? I think just because the holidays are coming up, I think it's fun to dabble in this in two ways. What do you think is a good response for somebody that's like, so when are you getting married? Or how's dating? Or when are kids coming? Like how would you handle like setting a bit of a boundary in that scenario?
Definitely. Like, oh my gosh, this is such a great topic. Cause a lot of these questions come up around this time, and it's like we're seeing people we don't often see, and they're checking in about these things and asking these questions. And like, I think knowing what you feel comfortable sharing is a good place, like, to start. Because, if you want to go in and you're like, I don't really want to talk about my dating life at all, like, I'm just going to shut the conversation down from the get-go. Like, okay, awesome. Have those plans to go in. And if that's your case, maybe saying like, I don't really feel comfortable talking about this at the get-together right now. Like, I'm just, in the season of seeing what happens, and I'll let you know, I'm excited to maybe bring somebody home next year, but right now, I'm just going along and seeing what happens. And that's kind of where it's at. Like, you could just shut it down kind of in that way. Tell them, I don't really want to talk about it. I'll let you know if something changes. But if you're going into the situation, and you're like, yeah, I'll tell them a little bit, you can maybe talk about like, oh yeah, I've met some people. This is what's happening. I will say though, that if you're like, is particularly with kids, this is something that I was having a conversation with a client around, because she kept getting this question, and she knew that this is going to come up at get-togethers, and she has been struggling with fertility. And she was like, okay, they're going to ask about kids. We're trying to have kids, and it's like not working, and this is making it worse. And so we kind of talked about like how to prepare for that. And so when she went in, she was having this conversation with like an aunt who was like always asking like, oh yeah, because I think she had a cousin who was having kids or something, and her aunt was like, oh, I want to have grandkids together, and like putting all this pressure on it. And so she basically said like, I noticed that this is something you bring up a lot and that, you desire this in my life. I desire it too. I really do. And I feel overwhelmed when it comes up in conversation. I feel really anxious. Maybe acknowledge we talked about whether or not she was going to acknowledge the fertility piece. She decided she would. And she just sort of said, like, we're having some struggles with this, and it really isn't helpful to keep having conversations about it. I really desire to remove the stress and pressure from the situation, and will tell you if anything changes. And like, just really shut it down, because she was like, I don't want to have a bunch of these conversations. Or like, I've also I had a client last year, around this time actually, who like announced to her family that she was expecting. And then at Thanksgiving, she was just like inundated with like, here's what you need to do. Let me touch your stomach. Oh, should you be eating that? All of this stuff. And she was like, I can't. She's like, I don't want to go to Christmas. Like, I have to see all these people again in a month. And it's only going to be worse because I'll be like showing more and this whole thing. And so, we really talked about having statements ready so she could say like, thank you for your input. We're excited to research all of this and make our own decisions as it gets closer to the time the baby's coming. And like, she just really was like, thanks for your input. We're researching a bunch of stuff, and setting clear boundaries of like, hey, you wouldn't just walk up and like touch my body if I wasn't pregnant. That does not change. Just now that I'm pregnant, like, please don't just walk up and touch me. And so she had like some statements ready to go. And then also like, I encourage people to have a few levels of statements. You could just, start with the very basic, like, I don't really want to talk about this. Like, just very basic. And if they keep pushing,
simple. I like it.
If they keep pushing, you could be like, this conversation really makes me uncomfortable. Like I said, don't want to talk about it. Can we talk about something else? And if they keep pushing after that, then, you could say like, I've acknowledged that this makes me super uncomfortable. And if we don't start talking about something else, I'm going to have to leave. And like warning them like, hey, this is serious. I will leave. And if they still don't get the hint, keep bringing it up. Like, you are allowed to excuse yourself, even if it's a family get together and everybody's going to, whisper about you. Like, you're allowed to do what you need to do to feel safe in that situation. And so, coming to it and saying like, I told you that I'm not available for this conversation. You keep bringing it up. I don't feel comfortable in this, and I'm going to, go outside for a while.
Absolutely.
And it's just like, you're allowed to do that. And
it's setting the boundary and resetting it for sure.
Yeah.
So two of the things that I love about what you were saying is that one is that boundaries, I think the biggest myth with boundaries is that you think you set it once and then you don't have to worry about it ever again. And that's like the number one thing. I'm like, a boundary is like a repeated thing. Like, if it like, you're going to get stronger in how well you hold them. Mm-hmm. But I think that's like one of the bigger myths about how to hold that boundary. So what you were saying is that you don't only say it once, you have to say it a few times.
Yeah. And I mean, I think from there too, it's like, just remembering like, you deserve to set it. And if they come back at you and are like, oh, but why, but like, you can just continue to stand in that power. And like, over time, you're teaching people like how to treat you, how to respond to you in this different way. And to acknowledge your humanness and the fact that you deserve to like feel safe in situations. So sometimes it does require kind of that recommitting, restating, standing up for it. And I think like, I also like to remind people too, that you can do that at any time. Like, if you, set the boundary and like, let it slip, you can reset it. Like, you can reset it anytime, even if, you set it and you're like, you forgot about it for 3 months. Like, you're allowed to just be like, you know what, I've actually been doing some thinking, and I really think that it would feel better for me in this conversation if we just didn't talk about XYZ, or if we, whatever. Like, you can always come back to it and set it again. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the other part of the boundary conversation is that the people who you are setting boundaries with, they're not always evil. Mm-hmm. Like especially with like the baby situation, that, and even the dating side of things is that they like, I loved like how you were, the guidance you give is giving some empathy. Like, that it's coming from a good place, and you and acknowledge that instead of just going like, stop asking me about it, like getting like angry. Like it's more of like, how can you like see where they're coming from, but still it's not good. So like I think that especially with like the family type of things, whenever, like for instance, whenever I got engaged, it didn't take more than 12 hours that for people to go like, when's the wedding? When's the wedding? And I am currently enjoying a 2-year engagement. I think I like the word fiance more than I like wife at the moment.
Yeah, there you go.
And being able to like, and I didn't realize, but I did develop a statement going like, we are enjoying being engaged. We're enjoying every second of it. And then like, but when's the wedding? I'm like, you'll know when we do. And, and I just want to say with like a nice, like confident smile. And they're like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they're like, okay, now we just won't ask her about it. We'll let her come to us.
Right. So the core thing is they want to be excited for you, but it doesn't mean that even if someone has the intention that it's a good thing, that it doesn't mean that you can't set that boundary. So I think that's such a big part of it. Aside from relatives, of course, we are certainly in like such a big era of availability when it comes to clients. And I think especially for the two of us as entrepreneurs, especially people who have worked with clients directly, like knowing that not only do I have clients that can email me, I have some that get to be on Voxer, Facebook groups, Instagram, all of these things, is that if somebody wanted to, they could be asking a lot of you at all times. So the idea behind like, being a people pleaser is like, oh, I always want to help people. How would you tell somebody or help somebody that tends to answer clients as they receive messages, or in general just realizes that they're spending a ton of time responding to email and texts and all of the things instead of being able to do their own work?
Totally. Yeah. So this to me always kind of comes back to that mindset piece of choosing to respond to your life rather than like reacting to what it throws at you. And just acknowledging like the fact that you are worthy of doing things in the order you want to do them. You're worthy of responding to things in the order, that you want to respond to them. You don't have to have this like constantly on and available and like, always being there at the drop of a hat. Like, sure, stay within the realms of your contract if you say you'll respond in 24 hours or whatever. But like, also just like, sometimes I put that in my contract early on that like, I will respond to messages within 24 hours. And like, sometimes I do respond right away, but I, at first, like told myself like, no, okay, you have 24 hours to respond. Sit with it for a second, sit with it, see what comes up. And in that, I actually found like, oh, I am able to have a better response when I like am sitting down in a space to be like, okay, I'm going to get on Voxer now and like respond to things, or, I'll respond to this email with this question this person asked after I've had some time to sit with it. And like, it just, I like to tell myself and remind myself, like, you deserve to take that space and like, do things in the order that feels right to you. So it's like, if I was planning to write content for, 2 hours, 10 to 12, but at 10:05, I get a Voxer message from somebody, like, cool, I can look at it after 12 because I am committed to like doing what I'm doing for the next 2 hours. And so there's just this piece of like realizing that you can set that boundary and like you can hold that boundary. And if you're getting in your head with this thought of like, oh, but like, what if, they get mad because I'm not there right away and all of that, like, just acknowledge that that is rooted in people pleasing. And like the fact that the only person that you need to be concerned about pleasing is yourself. And like, you get to do. So if it feels like, because I do this sometimes too, where I see a message and then I forget about it. And I'm like, oh, I'll go back and respond to it later. And so sometimes it does feel better for me in the moment to just like respond right away. But I like to check in with myself. Like, am I doing this? Like, am I choosing consciously to do this, or am I like kind of being guided to do this because like, oh gosh, I'm scared that they're not gonna, think that I'm an attentive coach or all of this stuff. And sometimes too, I find it, I always like, as a client, like respect the time of a coach who like puts those boundaries around our relationship. I'm just like, ooh, yeah, I know that she's committed to doing what she needs to do for her day, and she's not getting sidetracked by notifications all day and like getting pulled into situations. Like, so I always find it like, oh yeah, I see that person is committed to protecting their schedule. And it can be really powerful.
Being the role model again,
yeah.
like show your clients the way you hope they get to live their lives, which is what I love. And I think that's fantastic. And I even have to, for me, like I have to do a physical boundary where I actually have a scheduled summary of when I see the messages, because I block off, like I will answer at 10 and 3, if not sooner, each and every, like all day, but I make sure my notifications don't get in the way of that. Cause I'm the same way. If I click into it, and don't respond, then I might forget. So I am definitely in that similar realm, but like it's really important to note that boundaries are like that pathway to focus, like being always available. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes can be, kind of be a breeding ground for people to not really respect your energy and time. So like you are setting that tone. And I think when it comes to this like era of availability, like it's definitely harder than it was in the past. Like, in the past it was like letters and faxes and like phone calls, not all of these modes that we have now. But so there's some difficulty, but helping yourself have some of those hard lines can be important. So basics is definitely is definitely in the contract. I've even had a client before where like, can you get back to me right away? And I'm like, what is my boundary? And then they'll repeat it back to me. And I'm like, just a reminder. And also like, I also want you to have that. And like, so there's such a way in which, when it comes to this, is that by setting the tone, you're going to get the ideal clients that don't try to push that boundary.
Totally.
I love that. Amazing. I have so many more questions, which means there must be a future episode. Like, I feel like there's some things in here, but I want to respect your time boundaries here and be able to ask one more question here. So my podcast is called Limitless. In general, what would you say your definition is of limitless?
Ooh, limitless. Yeah, I really see it as just like the ability to do anything. Like, there is no limit to what I'm capable of. There is no limit to what I'm worthy of. And so I sort of see it as just this like all encompassing, like I can get as big as I want to get. I can be as bold as I want to get. I can, share as loudly as I'd like, because I like the only limits that exist are like ones that I put around myself or that other people, put on me. But embracing kind of a limitless approach to life is like, I'm capable of anything I desire. There are truly no limits. That's what I think.
Absolutely. Amazing. Alison, how can listeners stay in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can check out my website, poppylee.com, and on there I have a super fun quiz about which type of people pleaser are you. And there is a recovered people pleaser as one of the types. So you can figure out if you are officially a recovered people pleaser if you're striving for that. I also hang out on Instagram and LinkedIn. I really love LinkedIn these days. I see it as a very well-boundaried social media, because I feel like LinkedIn, you know what you're there for. You know what you're doing there.
Love my LinkedIn queens. My LinkedIn queens. It's such a great place.
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time there, and I'm always down to chat with people about boundaries, brainstorm how to say that difficult thing you're trying to say, helping you feel into the confidence of, delivering that boundary, practicing boundaries. I'm here for all of it. So come find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alison. All of lovelies, all of you, we have only scratched the surface of boundaries, because it definitely takes some really hard work sometimes with your inner child, and also just understanding how it plays a role in your life. So Alison is your girl. So we'll make sure to include that quiz. Her website is new-ish. I guess it's maybe been over a
Yeah.
month, but it looks beautiful, but it's absolutely beautiful. So go check it out. Thank you so much for joining us today, Allison. It was such a pleasure.
Yay, thanks for having me.